Testing. Anybody opposed to getting started a little early? Just a couple minutes early. I'm not hearing any opposed. Well, welcome everyone to Marquette Senior High School. Thank you for those of you that joined our tour at 3:30. We are going to have about a half hour here for the presentation, and then Miss Joyce from Myron Construction will come around with a cordless mic and take questions, and we'll do a little Q&A, a little more informal discussion. I want to introduce our panel for you this evening. From the far end, Travis Hongasto from IDI, he's an architect. Isaac Roberts, GEI, he is an engineer. Trevor Papour from Myron Construction. Bridget Joyce, also from Myron Construction. Lloyd Vanderscaff is our Auxiliary Services Director at Marquette Area Public Schools. Jim Lampman is our Assistant Superintendent of Finance, and my name is Zach Sedgwick, and I have the privilege, the honor of serving as superintendent. So, the presentation. We always like to start with our mission statement, to maximize the academic potential of every child. I came in about 5 years ago in the midst of COVID. COVID was still very much paramount in public schools. Anybody that worked in public education could attest to the impact of COVID on our students, our staff, our entire program. Maximizing the academic potential of every child during COVID, at all times was a challenge, but during COVID was particularly challenging. Safety and well-being of our students was something that COVID really changed the stakes as far as educators, what that entailed. Maximizing the academic potential of every child, our mission statement in light of our strategic plan. There are 6 different groups all working towards that mission statement within our strategic plan, and the focus for today is facilities and learning. Our infrastructure. When you think about education as an educator, when you think about the programming, when you think about what it takes to facilitate, to provide students an appropriate learning environment, programming necessary for them to be successful, you don't always go to infrastructure, but I think you'll hear tonight that infrastructure is a key component, foundational aspect of our program at Marquette Area Public Schools, and one that I think you will see we can share as a priority. Safety, infrastructure, and programming, the 3 pillars of this particular presentation. Safety has always been our number 1 priority. We've invested millions of dollars in improving safety over the years. And in this proposal, you'll continue to see safety as a priority. We're going to talk about this a little bit more here shortly, where I'll give you some examples of what we've done with safety, but it's been immense. Infrastructure. The bones of our building are solid. We have great brick and mortar. We have over 750,000 square feet of buildings at Marquette Area Public Schools. Our average building age is 60 years old. Our newest buildings, quote unquote newest buildings, are over 30 years old. The bones are good. It's the systems inside that are tired. Our heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, our electrical systems, our plumbing, all of our ADA, our accessibility, our CTE programming, academics, the arts and athletics. The systems, the programming is all outdated. I talked about COVID, and I talked about the size and the scope of Marquette Area Public Schools. When I took over, MTSS was the mechanism that we used to drive our strategic planning and ultimately student achievement. MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. It's a comprehensive, research-based, data-proven approach to ultimately impacting student achievement. It continues to be our focus area, and it continues to be what I lean on for addressing as complex a system as we have for the mission statement that I mentioned earlier, maximizing the academic potential of every child. I also like to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was a psychologist back in the 40s. Maslow's research on motivation, on what motivates learning, when you think about students reaching their academic potential, it's much like Maslow's hierarchy, and the very top of the hierarchy, or the goal or the pinnacle of his hierarchy, self-actualization, much like maximizing the academic potential of every child. That is all of our shared goal. However, in order for students to be successful, Maslow told us we had to address those most basic needs. So you actually have to start at the base of the pyramid, the base of the triangle, the physiological needs, before they're ever going to reach that self-actualization. What are physiological needs in terms of this presentation? It's the infrastructure I'm talking about. Safe, warm, and dry. We know students are not going to be successful if they're hungry. Well, we have free meals thanks to a statewide grant. We know that they're not going to be successful if they're cold. Our boilers run literally 10 months out of the year. We know they're not going to be successful if they don't feel safe as you move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, we're going to talk about this more in a second where I'm going to give you an example, but if they don't feel safe, if we can't communicate during an emergency, we're going to talk about PA systems. If we can't control the flow of traffic, human traffic, people that are coming in and out of our buildings to make sure that we're protecting our children, they're not going to be successful. They're never going to reach the self-actualization that Maslow talked about. Let's talk a little bit about how we got to this point in time. Again, 5 years ago I took over as superintendent. We were addressing a number of immediate needs, but infrastructure was clearly going to be a priority. There was no ignoring the needs of our facilities. I acted as a facilities director while being a superintendent. At the same time, I quickly realized that I needed the help of some additional expertise. Mr. Lampman played a key role in that initial phase when we were trying to address facilities, and then not long after we took over, we started bringing on additional team members. Mr. Roberts, I think, was first from GEI. He came on as an owner's representative. He helped us with a lot of the ongoing maintenance and projects that we had to manage. Mr. Hongestow from IDI came on shortly after, worked in an architectural capacity. More recently, we brought on Myron Construction. They're going to be a construction manager for this project if it's approved. I want to give her a shout out, and her department in particular. They specialize in education and public relations. They're responsible for a lot of the great graphics that you see, the print, the media that you're seeing. That's taken our communications to another level. So thank you, Bridget. Trevor's more recent to the team. Mr. Vanderscaff is our auxiliary services director. We brought him on and gladly handed over the role of facilities director to him, along with his role as transportation director. So anyway, that was when we first took over 5 years ago. We started doing our analysis almost immediately. We walked the buildings, we created our asset management plans, multiple lists, which you'll see, some of which you'll see tonight. Here's the timeline. So again, 2022, when we really started hitting infrastructure hard as a team. In May of 2025, the state of Michigan released a statewide infrastructure study where they told public schools throughout Michigan that they had $23 billion worth of critical infrastructure needs. That's 23 billion with a B worth of critical infrastructure needs. They told Marquette area public schools that we had over $100 million worth of critical infrastructure needs. We had already done our own internal study and determined about the same amount, over 100 million. Those were actually two different studies though, combined well over $1 million, $100 million worth of critical infrastructure needs. More recently, I've revisited that study with our lawmakers, our legislators, and reminded them that they're somewhat responsible for what we have realized as a critical need at Marquette area public schools, and asked them, what exactly are you going to do to help us with this particular need? Because the state of Michigan is somewhat unique. We're one of 12 states where the state of Michigan provides us no funding for infrastructure. Our only way to address infrastructure at the scale that we're talking about tonight is through a bond, through the voters. All right, so fast forward a bit from the statewide infrastructure study. In September, we sent a survey to over 17,000 voters' homes. We had on that survey a number of different informational pieces, some of which you'll see tonight. There was actually 6 different options on that survey. Prior to administering the survey, we had created, I said, different lists. One of those lists was our priority 1 list, the most critical projects that we felt were necessary for our infrastructure. The $60 million plan that you see on that ballot proposal came from that work, much of which came from that work. There was also a $70 million plan, an $80 million plan, a $90 million plan, and 2 additional plans that included a early childhood program and an indoor practice facility. We're going to talk a little bit more about the survey here in a minute, but it was clear from that survey that our community wanted the $60 million plan, that base plan, and to focus on the priority 1 projects. Once we got the survey back, we started developing the scope. The scope is the list, essentially the list of projects that's going to show up on the ballot. The board approved that scope as part of our PQ application with the Michigan Treasury. That happened in December. By going through the Michigan Treasury, we're going to get a more secure loan, a better interest rate. We'll save interest. That PQ application was approved by the Michigan Treasury and the Board of Education. And then in January, the board unanimously approved putting the proposal on the May 5th ballot. Earlier I mentioned safety, infrastructure, and programming as the 3 main pillars of this particular proposal. I also mentioned that we've spent millions of dollars on safety already, in part from grants, in part from capital projects, which is an account we use where we put money away to deal with infrastructure, and of course the general fund. Here's some examples of safety on your screen from left to right. We have PA systems, secure entrances, and cameras. So in a school setting, you can probably imagine in a school setting just how much leaders think about safety. In this day and age, you read the news, you pay attention to national, international events, I'm sure you can understand why safety is a focus. When you have an emergency, anytime you're running a school building, communication is important. But during an emergency, communication is paramount. It is absolutely essential to be able to communicate with the entire building in real time and to make sure you hit every building or every student and every staff member in that building. Up until recently, we were unable to communicate with our entire buildings. I literally had to walk around with a bullhorn at one point as a principal to communicate with our buildings during an emergency. Thanks to PA systems, camera systems, and radio systems, we now have a much safer environment, and this proposal that we're looking at tonight includes many more safety features, safety improvements as well. The secure entrances in the top middle was done a few years back, more than a few years back. Prior to my time, actually, much of that work was done where we were actually able to control traffic in and out of our buildings. Obviously, that is essential to keep a safe learning environment. Infrastructure. I said the bones were solid, but the systems inside, not as much. The parking lot, as an example of a project that we've done already, I want to use that as an example of cost, modern day cost. That parking lot that you see, that first picture there to the right of the word infrastructure, that parking lot cost about $2 million. At the time, it was about 2 years worth of sinking fund dollars just to do the parking lot at Marquette Senior High School. The sinking fund is great for ongoing maintenance, but the scale of need that we're talking about, it's just not sufficient. In the middle is a boiler, an example of a boiler project that we've done. Boilers throughout the building, this building, and throughout the district. Many of them are original to the building. This building, 60 years old, Bothwell, 50 years old. If you went on the tour, I probably don't need to tell you that the boilers are dated. And then playgrounds. One of the things that I learned through COVID is that outdoor education is a must with children. The importance of the social emotional learning component, the health and safety of our children to be able to play outside in a safe environment is key. And then of course programming, the third pillar. Academics, athletics, the arts, just to give you an example of some of the spaces that we've been working on. From left to right, athletics. Our football complex at the high school was done as part of the 2016 bond. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Academics, an example from our science labs that were recently done as part of the sinking fund. Here's another anecdote for you. Those science labs, which were here by the way, basically 3 labs and a couple of the classrooms in between, $1.3 million for our science labs. 1 year worth of sinking fund for just the science labs here at the high school. And then of course Kaufman Auditorium. Arts is a focus for us, a point of celebration for Marquette Area Public Schools. Kaufman Auditorium also in need of some improvement. More on safety. We do drills, enhancing, utilizing the systems that I'm talking about, the camera systems, the radio systems. Our law enforcement partners, our secure entrances, replacing exterior doors, PA systems in all but 2 buildings. The only 2 buildings that haven't seen those PA system improvements that I've talked about are Bothell Middle School and Grave Rat Elementary School. Those 2 buildings are included. The PA systems in those 2 buildings are included in this proposal. More cameras. We have a great partnership with Northern Michigan University where they actually have access to our cameras. In fact, they've installed our cameras, run the wires, actually installed the technology, and have access to it. So in an emergency, because of our network, our radio network, we're able to communicate with our local law enforcement and Northern's law enforcement. They also have access to our cameras, which allows us to direct movement of law enforcement and first responders in a way never done before. Huge improvement, a complete game changer. So when you do conduct a district-wide drill, you can actually see and direct movement in real time. I think our students, staff, and community recognize the improvements. 96% of them feel that MAPS provides a safe learning environment. So, the sinking fund, $1.3 million a year. Thank you so much. We could not maintain the infrastructure to the level that we are, as much as it needs to be improved upon. We could not do what we're currently doing without that sinking fund. The issue, that $1.3 million, is that we're currently spending about $3 million a year on facilities. Again, utilizing grants, utilizing capital projects, and utilizing the general fund. But it's not sustainable. The $3 million we're currently doing a year, again, great. However, pales in comparison, not sufficient when you think about the overall need, which is over 100 million. The iceberg analogy, which we've seen so many times, seems appropriate here to illustrate the need. I talked about the statewide infrastructure study. Thank you, lawmakers, for telling us we have over $100 million worth of need. What are you going to do about it? In fact, not only did they tell us we have over $100 million worth of critical infrastructure needs if we were to repair the buildings, they also told us it was going to cost us about $350 million, and now this is slightly outdated, it's much higher, I'm sure, or higher, almost $350 million to replace the buildings. So we agree with the state that repairing is much more reasonable than replacing, thus the reason for moving forward with the proposal. Just to illustrate the work that has been done with our partners from GEI and IDI, I have a person that helps me with these fancy slides with these animations. But years of work, boxes and stacks of reports that we've gone through to create these different lists, including the Priority 1 list that I talked about earlier, which ultimately drove the scope of this proposal. And you can see that there with the $61 million proposal that is directed by that red arrow. Okay, let's talk about the survey. The survey sent to, again, roughly 17,000 homes back in September. We asked and we listened. Here's the feedback. Let's focus on who said yes. Focus on those that are in support of the proposal. Great news, 89% of our staff were supportive. Good news, 69% of our parents were supportive. Not as great news is that 51% of those that are neither parents nor staff were supportive. The survey was conducted by a third party. The name of that third party was School Perceptions. They've worked with over 1,000 districts throughout the Midwest on these type of referendums or bond issues. The third-party Survey Perceptions, with their expertise, were able to help calculate what the probability of success was. Not just for the $60 million plan, but for all 6 of the options I mentioned earlier. Here's the results. First, over 1,900 survey respondents, roughly 6 times what we needed for statistical significance, good. A 13% response rate, also good. 69% of our residents supported the $60 million base plan, those priority 1 projects. It's about 20% of the community. 69% of that population was supportive of that base plan, also good. What's more concerning is once we did a weighted average, that weighted average, by the way, took into account who was more likely to vote. That's the 65 and older crowd, in case you're interested. 65 and older, more likely to vote no. When you took into account the response rate from the survey and their likelihood to vote and to vote no, the weighted average put us at about 53, almost 54%. That doesn't include the margin of error, which is roughly 2%. That means we could be up in the mid-50s or as low as 51.8, according to their estimation. A little bit too close for comfort. Part of why we're so intentional about the communication, about getting out and spreading the word. By the way, as part of the survey, there's some additional questions, including whether the respondents felt MAPS was delivering a high-quality education. 72% of the respondents felt that we were. This is a powerful slide. I like to leave this one up for a bit, just to leave some processing time. If you look at the slide, there's one very glaring missing piece of information. This is a comparison, a regional comparison of mill rates for public schools. From left to right, you have higher mill rates to lower mill rates. Marquette is missing, and when you include that particular data, you can see our 1.31 mill rate is far less than almost all of our neighbors. In fact, if you were to draw a line, a horizontal line right about where Negaunee is, a horizontal line at 4.5, that's 4.5 mills, that's the state average. Far less than almost all of our neighbors, and certainly far less than the state average. If you were to support, if the community supports the 1.55 mil increase that we're talking about tonight, that gives us about 2.86 total. 2.86 puts you somewhere between Gwinn and Escanaba, still less than some of our neighbors and also less than the state average. So here's an overview of the ask. $59.995 million ask, which is a 1.55 mil increase. The 3 pillars that I keep talking about, safety, infrastructure, and programming, all addressed in this proposal. We've been making intentional efforts, significant effort, to try to minimize the tax impact and minimize the interest paid on this particular proposal. We decided to phase the borrowing, 2 phases. It's 28 years total for the term, 2 14-year phases, total of 28 years, and then with the phasing also the ability to refinance in 10 years. And we felt that was important since, as I've mentioned multiple times, we've identified over $100 million worth of need. $60 million will be wonderful if it's approved, but we're still going to have $40 million to go. And that's in today's dollars. So in 10 years, based on this plan, we would be able to refinance, potentially with some type of no mill increase to our voters. Every building, every student, 750,000 square feet, 3,200 students, all impacted by this proposal. We've made an intentional effort again to address every building and the most critical needs for each building. A little bit more about the scope, the list of projects. Last night's town hall was at Bothwell Middle School. Again, that was since Bothwell Middle School has the largest investment. About 40% of the 60 million, 24 million or so. That investment is more significant at Bothwell because there's more need. Part of that need is actually an addition that we would put on to Bothwell that would allow us to move the students into different spaces as we did a major renovation to the 2nd floor. So we have the addition, We also have the major renovation of the second floor. I mentioned ADA accessibility improvements. If you were at Bothwell yesterday and part of the tour, or if you've been at Bothwell, you can probably attest to the difficulty of the layout. Imagine if you had accessibility challenges, mobility challenges, it would be very difficult to navigate that building. Not to mention the sound that travels between classrooms, the way humans travel in that building, our hallways, our bathrooms, our locker rooms, all of those spaces are outdated and not conducive to 21st century learning. PA systems, communication systems, which I mentioned earlier, window and facade fixes or improvements as part of that addition and second floor renovation. CTE is a focus in this proposal, career and technical education for Bothwell and Marquette Senior High School. The athletic lockers, if you were part of today's tour, you would have seen the athletic lockers, and I can only imagine your thoughts after seeing the condition of that space. Well, the same is true at Bothwell. Those lockers are also in disrepair. Music rooms, band and orchestra and choir, both at Bothwell and Marquette Senior High School. LED lighting you'll see throughout the district. Operational efficiency is certainly a focal point for this proposal. And technology, trying to create our spaces more conducive, more appropriate for 21st century learning. Technology is rapidly changing, as I'm sure you're aware. It's hard to keep up with, especially with the aging infrastructure that we have. After Bothwell Middle School, Marquette Senior High School gets the second most investment, or is second in the scope and scale of the investment. Marquette Senior High School, we got to do something about the press box. I know that'd be hard to see on a winter day, but that press box is literally dilapidated. Natatorium upgrades, that's our pool. I think some of you saw the pool earlier as part of the tour. We love our pool. We're very invested in our swimming program, both extracurricular and curricular, but that pool is very expensive. And if you were underneath the pool and you saw that filter tank, that room downstairs, very tired. ADA improvements, accessibility again at the high school, cafeteria and media center. Our classroom furniture is original in many cases, very outdated throughout our district. Again, CTE spaces at the high school, athletic lockers, music rooms, LED lighting and technology. There's definitely going to be a theme here, which is why on this next slide we actually capture the rest of the buildings all in one slide. Just if you read on the top, in case you're curious, after the high school at 11% is Graveret, including Kaufman Auditorium. Then Sandy Knoll at 8%. By the way, Graveret built in the late 20s. Sandy Knoll and Marquette Alternative High School at 6%, built in the 50s. Cherry Creek and Superior Hills were built in the early 90s. Those are our newest buildings, but again, they're over 30 years old. They're going to get the least amount of investment for obvious reasons. But what's going to happen throughout those buildings, not everything applies to every building, but just to give you a summary. Science classroom, particularly at Bothwell and the alternative school. A meeting room at the alternative school. Classroom furniture throughout. I think Kaufman Auditorium speaks for itself. Technology throughout. Exterior doors. Sandy Knoll, I think, gets some of that. Perhaps I would have to defer to Travis on some of the other buildings, but certainly Sandy Knoll I know is included on the exterior doors. An art room at Sandy Knoll, heating and ventilation, especially at Sandy Knoll in the alternative school, and perhaps Graveret Elementary School, ADA improvements, classroom renovations throughout, a playground at 3 of our elementary schools, all but Superior Hills, which is why Superior Hills is slightly lower in investment than Cherry Creek. Superior Hills parent group was able to secure a grant to purchase a new playground, which is going to go on this summer. The other 3 buildings are included in this proposal, and LED lighting, as I mentioned earlier. If you received one of our cards previously, these cards that are very handy for disseminating easily, on the back of these cards is the information that you'll see on this slide, a nice synopsis of all of the projects that I've listed. On the left are all 7 of our buildings, along with a line for athletics and the bus garage. Along the top, you see the 3 pillars that I keep mentioning: safety, infrastructure, and programming. And you can see what's being done in each of the respective buildings. Let's talk a little bit about cost. We always hear about the cost. A little bit about mills. A mill is 1/1000th of your taxable value. So a 1.55 mill rate by your taxable value divided by 1,000 gives you the amount of increase. Taxable value is about half of your property value. So let's say your house is worth $100,000. Your property value is $100,000. That makes the taxable value about $50,000. You take the mill rate times your taxable value, you divide it by 1,000, and you get about $77.50 a year for that $100,000 home. However many times 100,000 your house's taxable value, however many times $100,000 your property value is, you can then multiply $77.50 by that same number to get your total tax impact. So that $100,000 home with a $50,000 taxable value, that $77.50 a year divided by 12 gives you $6.45 a month. If you take the $77.50 divided by 365, you get 21 cents a day. Key takeaways from this presentation. Community-driven solution. I mentioned that we asked and we listened. The survey back in November, we literally took the mill rate, the $60 million Priority 1 plan, which the community clearly prioritized or clearly was preferred. The $60 million plan, the 1.55 mil increase directly from that survey. The 3 pillars, safety, infrastructure, and programming. Mentioned fiscal responsibility, that mill rate comparison, 1.31 mils that we currently levy. By the way, that's a sinking fund at a little under 1 mil, combined with a small bond from 2016 at 0.38 mils. That's where you get 1.31 that we currently levy. We've been fiscally responsible not just with that mill rate, but also with putting money aside for capital projects so that we can supplement the sinking fund and do $3 million a year with only a $1.3 million revenue source. I mentioned operational efficiency, improving the systems, the HVAC systems, the electrical systems throughout our buildings. LED lighting throughout our buildings is obviously going to improve our operational efficiency. Workplace readiness, CTE spaces, academic spaces, athletic spaces, the arts, preparing students for the workplace, giving them the skills that they need to hopefully stay in Marquette to help keep this community thriving for years to come. The vote is, of course, on May 5th. And as I mentioned earlier, in this proposal, impacted is every building and every student. Please go to our website to find much more information. We have a page that specifically addresses the bond proposal for May 5th. There's also a facilities page where you can find all of the studies that I mentioned, all of the information you could possibly want, presentations that I've given, like this one tonight. The QR code will take you to that website, as will the information, the QR code on these index cards, www.mapsnet.org, to find more information. Want to thank you for coming tonight. Want to thank you for your support. I always celebrate the partnership that we have with the Marquette area and the investment that our community has made in our schools in the past. And I think the support that you will show, I hope, on May 5th. So we're going to actually open this up to some Q&A. We'll make it a little bit more of a discussion. The panel all has access to mics. Remember, panel, to hit the button so it turns red. If you want to ask a question, Miss Joyce will come around with the portable mic so that we can hear you, and your question will get picked up by our sound person.
Do we give our name or anything?
No, you don't have to.
Cherry Creek did their playground last summer. They could not be on the playground. It was just redone. And also I have a question about the unlimited tax bonds.
Well, I will defer to Mr. Lampman on the tax bond, but as far as Cherry Creek, there was some work done on their playground last summer. We did that with our own internal funds. This project or this proposal has a much larger scale playground improvement. Much of the investment at Cherry Creek was actually in the infrastructure of the playground, not necessarily the equipment. For example, the sidewalk was in total disrepair at Cherry Creek. That was a significant portion of that playground improvement. We have problems with drainage at Cherry Creek, so there was a lot of earth moving that had to take place. This particular proposal probably is focused more on bringing in more modern, more up-to-date equipment for those kids.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, I know it was closed all summer because my kids wanted to go play there and we couldn't.
It was, and I understand the frustration. We had challenges ourselves trying to coordinate movement and get that taken care of. So I understand. Mr. Lampman, do you want to talk about her question on the bond?
Certainly. Could you repeat that, please, as far as your question?
Usually when you vote on a bond, it tells you 30 years or 28 years, and this one says on the bond proposal, ballot language is obligation unlimited tax bonds.
So your question is to the definition for an unlimited tax bond. So there's a lot of different types of bonds out there. Let me give you the big three. So there is an unlimited tax bond, limited tax bonds, and there's also revenue bonds. So a revenue bond, let me work backwards here. A revenue bond would be something like, think about a local utility system. So it would be based off user fees. So say a water system would collect revenue from charges to their utility customers. That revenue would be used to pay back a revenue bond. Then you have your limited tax obligation bonds, and those are usually subject to some sort of statutory limitation. What we're proposing is an unlimited tax obligation bond, which is kind of what a bondholder would like to see, because that means it's backed by the full faith of the property taxes of a government. So that's what we'd be doing. We'd be levying 1.55 mills on our tax base that would specifically go towards paying back this bond. And we're looking at about a 28-year payback on this proposal. So it would be, it's just the vernacular that's used in the bond world to call it unlimited, but they're also called general as well. So it doesn't really describe what it is, but basically it's using the full faith of the tax dollars of the government to pay back that bond. That make sense?
No.
Jim, can I, really quickly, I think, because from the finance side of it, I'm probably more along the same lines as far as trying to understand it. It does not open it up to be unlimited dollars, unlimited years to pay that back. It's just the type of bond, it's the type of funding mechanism versus how long and how much to pay for it. The mill rate, the 1.55, and the overall project size is what you're voting on. The unlimited, the language in there is just the bond, how they describe that. It's attorney and finance.
Yeah, it's just industry language that it's called unlimited or a general tax obligation bond. It's just language used in the industry.
Because when I first saw that, I said unlimited bond. I know that you're asking for so much money, but if it says unlimited bond, does that mean then you, without coming to the voters, you could come back and add more to that bond? When I saw that unlimited, that's what I thought.
Understand.
Right.
That's not
Yeah.
what it means.
Yeah. No. This would be voter approved for a specific purpose, a specific dollar amount, and we could not use those funds for any other purpose, nor could we spend more than was approved by the voters. If we were to want to do additional projects down the road, as Mr. Sedgwick indicated, this is only $60 million of a $100 million need. That's something we'd have to go back and have a conversation with the voters to see if the voters would approve any further projects beyond this $60 million proposal.
That makes me more comfortable.
Thank you. Great question.
Ms. Joyce, carrying around the mic so we can pick up your question on the video.
In regard to the Bothwell School, which takes up the biggest chunk of money, and what is one of the newer schools. My question is, first of all, why would one of the newer schools be taking up such a big chunk of the money? And secondly, are we going to make sure we don't make that mistake again, whatever it is that's making that one so expensive?
Travis, I'm going to let you field part of that, but I will say that in my time as superintendent, the building that I've heard the most concern about is Bothwell Middle School. The layout from the 70s is not necessarily conducive to 21st century learning. So that second floor renovation is more than just the systems, it's a full refurbish, a full renovation of the second floor. It's also our second largest building, so even though it may not be as old as Sandy Knoll or the alternative high school, it's much larger. So the scope and scale is different. And the last thing I'll say is some buildings, although older, have undergone some improvements over the years, namely Graverette, which was built in the late 20s. A building that old has undergone multiple improvements, so even though older might actually get is going to get a less improvement overall. But I think Travis, who's our architect, could probably even give you more detail than what I gave.
Sure. I think to Zach's point, the layout of Bothwell is really the main issue. There was a short-lived educational concept in the 70s. We do K-12 work all over the state, and there's several of those, that type of the open pod concept that we have since infilled. So it's basically a fresh start for that second floor there, making more modern learning spaces. To Zach's point earlier with the addition, it's twofold. It allows us to phase some of those kids down into that portion once that's ready, opening up the second floor from a construction phasing standpoint. But also a lot of the rooms up there they're small, they're chopped up, they're not utilized for today. I'd say probably from the get-go it was never necessarily a good layout, but being able to redesign that space, we're not adding classrooms per se. At the end of the day, the classroom quantity will really be a wash. It's just more of the classroom layouts would be suited for today's education standards. So.
Thank you very much. Got another question up here in the front.
Thought I saw your hand.
Yeah, just a note and a follow-up on this nice lady's comment, but the ballot language, I don't know if it's too late to change any of that, but it would be nice if we could, if you could legally do it and call it a general bond rather than a general unlimited bond, but food for thought anyway.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's already been sent off to our county clerk, and it's finalized. Board approved it. I appreciate that concern. We'll taking that into account perhaps 10 years from now if we have to come back.
Two questions. In 2022, we had a millage. Why wasn't any of this identified in 2022? Realizing that you just showed up on the door, and I'm not blaming you, but shouldn't this have been addressed 4 years ago? And two, wait, let me get the other
sorry.
question in real quick. The ballot language doesn't mention 1.55 mils in here. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a finance guy, but I am one of those 65-plus-year-old guys that you have to convince.
Yeah.
Tell me where the language is.
Sure, I appreciate giving it a trial run with you. So, first of all, I would say when we renewed the sinking fund, we were aware of the need, the greater need, and we were aware that the sinking fund was not going to be sufficient. The sinking fund is going to be appropriate for ongoing maintenance. But I gave you a couple of examples. Our parking lot at the high school, which was done in combination with my predecessor and myself, at the time was about 2 years worth of a sinking fund dollars. The science labs, which was a project that was identified in the original sinking fund and that we executed as part of the renewal. And by the way, it was a pure renewal that we did in 2022. That science lab, about $1.3 million, 1 year worth of sinking fund. So you have roughly 3 years of sinking funds for just the two projects that I mentioned. We were aware of the need, and we were aware that the sinking fund was not going to be sufficient very early But we had to develop a much longer term and a much more sustainable plan, a much larger scale plan than we were prepared to deliver in 2022. It's literally taken us from that time until now to prepare the information that you're seeing before you and to address the large scale need of over 750,000 square feet of buildings and the many projects that are included. As far as your second question, I'm gonna pass that one along to Mr. Lampman.
I'm sorry, my computer is locked up a little at the moment. I was trying to pull the actual ballot up, but what you're looking at is an excerpt that was created for the flyer. The actual ballot language should have the millage listed, if I'm not mistaken.
While he's looking that up, it is on our website as well. I can try to pull it up on my computer since I actually have the projector going, but I can assure you that when you go to www, and I'm actually going to go ahead and demonstrate how you get there. When you go to www.mapsnet.org and you see the 2026 bond here, tab, that ballot language here, you can see what you see on the flyer, but then you keep scrolling and you're going to get to that tax impact, the mill rate that we're talking about.
Can you read that for me?
I mean, who can see that?
Which is why it didn't appear on the flyer, by the way, because it would have been very small on the flyer. So yeah, here we go. So the estimated millage that will be levied for the proposed bonds in 2026 is 1.55 mils, $1.55 on each $1,000 of taxable valuation, for a 1.55 mils net increase over the prior year's levy. The maximum number of years the bond of any series may be outstanding, exclusive of any refunding, is 28 years. The estimated simple average annual millage anticipated to be required to retire this bond debt is 1.58 mils, $1.58 on each $1,000 of taxable valuation. The school district does not expect to borrow from the state to pay debt service on the bonds. The total amount of qualified bonds currently outstanding is $0. The total amount of qualified loans currently outstanding is $0. The estimated computed millage rate may change based on changes in certain circumstances. Pursuant to state law, expenditure of bond proceeds must be audited and the proceeds cannot be used for repair or maintenance costs, teacher, administrator, or employee salaries, or any other operating expenses.
Thank you. You go again.
If you've got more, I'll come back to you.
Sadly, I'm known to talk a lot.
It's okay, your questions are good.
So the entire MAPS millage will be about 288, 29.
2.86, I believe. 1.31 plus 1.55 is 2.86. If you're using the 1.58, that is an estimate. Again, that's going to be based on property values, interest rates, so that exact mill rate is going to fluctuate. In fact, based on the trends that we've seen, we've actually been able to reduce that mill rate since property values have been increasing and interest rates, at least recently, have been decreasing. So, Mr. Lampman, is that a correct assessment that I just gave to that gentleman?
I believe it is, yes, sir.
And the graph you showed on the back page of the regional mill comparisons is apples to apples. These are totals for all these other school districts?
Correct. We received that from our financial advisors, PFM. So yes, that is credible, and we have all that information sourced.
Yeah.
Are you gonna go for another millage in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years to make up the $100 million that you really want?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, you asked me if I was going to. Who knows what the future holds for me? But I will say that the plan is intentional in that we phased our borrowing so as to allow for a potential no mill increase in roughly 10 years, try to maybe recapture some principal and perhaps some of that 40 million, since it's not the need is not going to go away. Meanwhile, I've been working our legislators, our decision makers, on the point or the fact that I mentioned earlier that the state of Michigan does not provide public schools any money for infrastructure, yet they told us we had over $100 million worth of need. I put some of the onus on our legislators to do something about the additional need that is not being addressed, since we're asking our taxpayers so much to support this $60 million proposal.
Yeah, go for it.
One thing that we do see with districts across the state, and I think it does go along the lines with that graph that's on there, is that once a district is successful with getting these taxes and doing that, to Zach's point earlier, if it's 10 years down the road, a no mill increase is how you're able to do that. And if it's every 10 years, a lot of districts will be on certain cycles to go back to the community, continue to garner their support. So we don't end up in a scenario where 20 years from now, hey, we have another $100 million. It's if you do it strategically and have that support along the way and take care of the buildings throughout the process, it's a much easier ask once having that millage rate drop so low is why we're in the scenario we are right now. So because of not keeping up with it, basically.
Great questions. Yes, thank you. Any other questions? Great discussion. Well, we very much appreciate you coming tonight, the support of our community. Hope you all have a lovely evening. That will wrap it up for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.